Round one is done, and round two, we are just getting underway. How are you? This is the Cross Ice Feed with David Stearns and Brian Schrembs. Schrembs, how about we go ahead and recap our picks from the first round? We may or may not hit the mark on a few of them, but a couple of surprises in there.
Yeah, we didn't do too bad. I'm sorry to say that the Blues, my home run pick for the year, is no longer a dream, but it's pretty much a nightmare, and we'll get to that a little bit later on with what's going to happen in St. Louis. But I think the biggest surprise was our how do you put it, our confidence in the idea that Pittsburgh was going to just obliterate the New York Islanders. I had a lot of fun watching that series. It told me a lot about Pittsburgh more than New York, to be honest with you.
Well, we'll get to the goaltending controversy there in just a few moments, but let's run down our picks. We'll go round by round really quick here. You said Chicago, in between the Chicago and Minnesota series. I picked this one to be the surprise pick, and this one turned out to be the second to maybe three blowouts in the overall playoffs this year. Unfortunately for me, I was embarrassed by the fact that Minnesota didn't show up. They showed up for one game, and that was about it. Chicago dominated that series. They took it 4-1. Schrems, you said they'd take it in 6 or 7, and I said Minnesota in 7, and I wasn't even close. So Chicago picked up a lot of steam there, and quite an impressive showing across the board from Chicago. They appear to be unstoppable as they'll take on Detroit in the second round.
I still have a hard time believing that Ray Emery is going to take this team to the playoffs, or the deeper into the playoffs in the Stanley Cup. But he's given me very little reason to doubt him.
Well, it's Corey Crawford's show at this point, and he's proven himself with a solid 132 goals against and a 95% save percentage. And the real star of the team right now, as an offensive force, has been Patrick Sharp, who has 5 goals and 1 assist in those 5 games. So, well, once you get Patrick Sharp going, well, the other Patrick's going to show up, and so is Taves and Hossa. So,
what's interesting is Sharp missed the last 2 months of the season because of injury and came back right before playoffs. Could you imagine what they could have done if he was still in the lineup? I mean, obviously he's a pivotal player, but he's showing his true colors, and I dare you to find a team that's going to challenge these guys to their full potential.
Yeah, and the thing is, I really think that Minnesota's got the right building blocks for the future. I mean, we had a few one-goal games in this series, and then a shutout, and then just the nail in the coffin with the 5-1 final in that 5th game. But, I think Minnesota's on the right track. They brought in Jason Pominville. Watch them sign him for a long-term deal because he seems like the missing piece of that puzzle. But, of course, that injury he suffered from Dustin Brown's flying elbow at the end of the regular season kind of put that plan on hold as far as rocking him out, and they went light on him. They put him on a third line, and that really didn't pan out well as far as the stretch there with Minnesota. So I guess looking forward to next year, as we always say in Buffalo, and Minnesota's been looking towards next year ever since, the early 2000s to get back into contention here.
Let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do they buy out Danny Heatley?
That thought did cross my mind because, they're setting up with Zach Parise and, Ryan Sutter. And I really think that Danny Heatley may be at the end. He's, I don't know if they want to go the New York Islanders route and buy out the players like, they did with Yashin and DiPietro, but it might be an option on the table for Minnesota. And they got a lot of young talent, and they're, I hate to overuse this phrase, but they're an up-and-coming team that has risen from the ashes, and they've sold out their games for numerous years now, if I'm not mistaken. You compare them to a team like Minnesota, or not Minnesota, yeah, we're talking about Minnesota. Edmonton, you given it enough time, things have got to change, and you know what? You made it into the playoffs. That's step one. Next year, the next step is obviously to get out of the first round, and I think they're on the right track for that.
I think you're right, too.
But Heatley being bought out, I wouldn't put it past him. We'll find out. Okay. All right, so the second series will move down the stretch here. A big surprise to both of us. It was Detroit and Anaheim. It had to take 7 games to settle the score in this one. And the Detroit Red Wings strike first in the Game 7, and some statistic that keeps being thrown out there is the first team to score in a Game 7 wins over 70% of the time. So that stat proved true here. And so Detroit moves on and plays Chicago in the second round. Talk a little bit about this series, Schrembs. I mean, it came down to a one-goal Game 7, and Anaheim, they had the opportunity to close it out twice, and they just couldn't get the job done.
Yeah, it's surprising, and I know before this season began, we both had Anaheim in our personal predictions, not even making the playoffs. So for them to be there was an accomplishment in and of itself. But, Detroit not only surprised the two of us, but the rest of the hockey world. I don't think they got the credit they deserved coming into the playoffs, given that they sort of just limped in, and defense is a question for those guys. Goaltending, it wasn't the best in round one, but it outlasted Anaheim. I don't know. Can this team keep up with Chicago? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think defense is the issue for Detroit right now, and that's something they're going to address in the off season. But it's a good story to take out of the first round. Leaves a lot of questions in Anaheim. Anaheim was they were just red hot this season, and I think, and we'll talk about it here shortly. Jonas Hiller's future in Anaheim could be in question.
Well, whether or not they can rock out fast through the next few years, he's going to be a restricted free agent, I believe, in the next year or two. Well, actually, I would say 2 years if this is his first. So, the defensive core of Anaheim had it better set up going into this series, but Detroit had their backs up against the wall, risking missing the playoffs for the first time in 22 years, and all the credit in the world to them for making a last-ditch effort there at the end to make it in, and then surprising all of us. I mean, Anaheim was one of the hottest teams in this season, up there with Chicago and Pittsburgh, and then all of a sudden it just came down to one-goal games, and we thought a 4-0 blowout in Game 2 would have been like the convincing factor that Anaheim was going to seal this series, no problem, in the near future at the very least. But all the credit in the world goes to the Detroit Red Wings. Henrik Zetterberg and Pavel Datsyuk, two of the hottest names in hockey these days, up there with Crosby and Ovechkin and Stamkos.
They came alive, didn't they?
They really did, and they came alive right at the perfect time. And it's really fantastic to see them show that Detroit still has the guts and glory going forward without their captain from numerous years, Nick Lidstrom. So it's about time. It really is. And I can't wait to see what fireworks happen with Chicago and Detroit, because this, remember, will be the last year that they're in the same division. And next year with the realignment, who knows what that's going to look like for the playoff picture.
It's true. And it's good to see an original six matchup. Just to throw that out there, we have a couple of them going on right now.
Oh yeah, and I'm looking forward to the next round with obviously New York and Boston, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. But also, just a note here that Detroit's overtime play has been just dominating. So just watch for any games that go to overtime with Chicago. That I think Detroit's going to have the edge. And then also Abdelkader, I like them. I like Justin Abdelkader, but talk just very briefly about that hit on Tony Ludman, who just got knocked silly. That was...
What's your call? Where do you stand on this?
He left his feet. What are you going to do?
Yep.
What are you going to do? He left his feet, head contact, that's it. Game over, suspension, obvious. So I don't think anyone has an argument against that.
People in Detroit had a big argument. I was reading online that the Detroit Free Press was quite against the idea of a suspension, and in the heart of a hard-fought series like that, rightfully so in their hometown. But I'm not thinking there's any argument there whatsoever. And it's good to see that suspensions are being dished out in the playoffs as well.
Well, there was some missed calls in the Washington-New York series that should have been suspensions that we'll talk about real soon here. But let's move on to our next series in the West. A big shocker. I didn't think that this one was going to be as short as it was, but hey, that's what you get when you got Corey Schneider and Roberto Luongo. But I mean, Luongo, he was the man to beat, and they beat him like a rented mule. And the San Jose Sharks sweep the Vancouver Canucks and that would be the only sweep in the first round. Schrembs, the Sharks, they're out for blood.
No, they're out to silence the critics of what? How long have people just said the Sharks all the way in the past 7 or 8 years? I mean, it seems to be a pretty good trend, and rightfully so. They have the lineup. They had Nabokov for a while. They have a good goaltender in Niemi. Nobody gives Niemi the credit that he deserves. He got a cup with Chicago. He had a really good season, a quiet season. He didn't jump off the charts with numbers, but he didn't bury himself down in the stat sheet. He was hanging around top 10 goaltenders all year. A player to watch if he's going to keep them alive against LA, or if anybody's going to keep that team alive against LA, it's going to be Niemi. But I wonder what's going on in Vancouver.
Yeah.
A team that was so highly touted a couple of years ago. I mean, they're on the brink of a Stanley Cup, and all of a sudden they've been just obliterated by. I don't want to say unworthy opponents, but opponents you wouldn't expect to just go in there and sweep them right out.
Yeah, and all the credit in the world to Corey Schneider. I mean, I'll give him credit for this series. He showed up. The rest of the team didn't. And with the controversy surrounding those two, in net, toggling between 1 and 2, but Corey Schneider, he was the goalie. He was really solid on his game. Roberto Luongo, he was beating the fact that he's not the number one goalie in Vancouver, but yet I think that the team was so surrounded by that, and the reason why I say Roberto Luongo was beaten like a rented mule is because he was put off to the side when the team really needed, some focus. And the thing is, I think that with the shortened season and this idea that Luongo was not traded, it was such a big distraction in the locker room that it did put everybody's minds elsewhere. And then when it really counted, where was Daniel and Henrik and Kessler and Roy? Where were these guys that were supposed to, spark this offense? I mean, if you look at them on paper, you'd think that the Vancouver Canucks were stacked.
It should be. Well, you got to think it should be some sort of combination between Vancouver and Chicago at some point in the Western Conference, as duking it out for a chance to play in the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
But you have to go back to the beginning of the season, even off season. The extended off season gave them even longer of an opportunity to make a deal. And now that you look back on it, obviously hindsight is 20/20.
Yeah.
But you have to think: is this season a failure because you didn't make a move, because you thought that you could go in with, on paper, the best goaltending tandem in the league, and they didn't disappoint this year. I mean, it was a rocky start for him, but when it comes down to it, Luongo's no slouch, and I don't know. He's going to end up somewhere, whether it be back in Florida or St. Louis. Who can really say? But I think management's going to take some heat from the hometown media about not pulling the trigger sooner.
Well, I think so. And when you toggle, Luongo obviously in Game 1 when Schneider wasn't ready for whatever injury, that pretty much kept him out at the end of the season. I do wonder what's going on. I mean, if you don't have one goalie that is highly touted as the big guy, not ready to go, and then the other guy that's the next in line isn't ready to play, I mean, it's I don't know. I think that Vancouver's really got to look deep into next season. Obviously, their penalty kill was absolutely abysmal in this series. So a lot of things, everything that could go wrong went wrong for the Vancouver Canucks.
And maybe it's a good thing. Maybe they can shake that number one every single season stigma, like you said, based on the players that they have on paper.
Yeah.
Maybe they come back down to earth a little bit and slide into that 4 or 5 spot next year and just decimate people. I mean, maybe there's some sort of blessing in disguise for that team.
Well, we both called this series, but we said in 6, but instead it's 4. So 2 games less, and we are right on the team. And we were right on the next series. And I actually got the number of games correct with 6, and LA advances past St. Louis. I mean, you and I both agreed early before the season, before even a lockout, that St. Louis was an obvious clear favorite for the Stanley Cup this year. But things just they didn't stack up against the defending Stanley Cup champs who, they kind of toggled throughout the year, the shortened season. They were, out of it and into it and out of it and into it. But a couple of one-goal games to start this series, it looked like St. Louis was going to walk away with it, and then storming back are the LA Kings, who take this one 4-2.
I think you're going to look to Jonathan Quick for another deep playoff run for this team. He is a good goaltender for the regular season and probably the best goaltender in the league right now for postseason play. And I'm giving the second most important postseason goaltender to Braden Holtby, but I'll give a nod to Quick to be the best goaltender in the playoffs right now. I think we were going on the premise that Elliott and Halak would be a whole lot better than they were this year, and I understand they had injury issues. I get that, but it comes out after the playoffs that St. Louis and Hitchcock and Halak really didn't get along, and there's a lot of animosity there. So it seems like goaltending is the issue, not so much the offense. I like what they have for offense. It's young, it's exciting. They've proven themselves offensively. It's the goaltenders that got the better of them this year.
Yeah, and looking at some stats here, I love stats. 86% of teams that take a 2-0 lead go on to win a series. Apparently the Kings, well, they're the 14%. So being defending Stanley Cup champions, usually it puts a little more pressure on you, but I would also think it applies just as much pressure to the team you're up against in any round of the next year's playoffs. Just the same, I mean, the Blues, they couldn't handle the onslaught from, I think great playmaking from Mike Richards, Justin Williams, this team, even Voinov. You got depth in LA. You really do. And I think that they solved St. Louis rather quickly. And it's just the one-goal games kind of stood out to me. It's like, all right, this is tighter than I thought it was going to be. So not too shabby. You said LA in 7. So, I mean, St. Louis, they got all the right parts, like I was saying about like Minnesota just needing to tweak a few things. I think St. Louis only needs to add in 1 or 2 players, and they got the best team in hockey. But I put them up against Pittsburgh. You may say, that may not be the case, but St. Louis unfortunately couldn't deliver. I mean, this was probably the tightest series out of all of them because, the one thing that stands out to me is every game was by 1 goal.
Yep.
So,
and you have to wonder, does St. Louis, and they can look back on it now, obviously the goaltending, but does St. Louis have the complete package? LA does. LA has scoring. They have the grit that you need to. If you need someone to scrap, you got someone to scrap. If you need good defense for an off night from Quick, you have the defense. They have one of the best defenses in the league, and they're young. They're going to be there for a while. I don't know. This team sort of just emerged out of nowhere last year, and they haven't really slowed down at all.
Well, we look forward to seeing them play against the Sharks. That series starting up real soon here. I think that the Sharks are in for a bit of a surprise. I think LA will take it to them, and we'll get to our predictions at the end of the show. So moving on, we're gonna take a look at our East matchups. Yeah, let's talk about that surprising series, shall we? We thought it was going to be an easy walk-away victory for the Pittsburgh Penguins, but the Islanders put up a great fight.
They did, and it's hats off to the New York Islanders for doing what they did. And Nabokov is I don't know what happened a couple of years ago. He flaked and went overseas, came back. He's still a good goaltender. There's a lot of holes that team needs to fill. Not big holes, just little tweaks here and there. They reminded me a lot of the 99 Sabres when they made that run to the Cup. There weren't a lot of big names on that team. and they were scrappy. They found ways to get the job done night in, night out. And the Islanders have it. They have good balance. They need one or two key players to come to New York and fill a certain role. Tavares needs a counterpart. He needs a Datsuk off on his wing. He's easily one of, and I'm glad he got the recognition this year, but he was easily one of the most overlooked players in the league. And I think people are going to take notice, and hopefully some free agents will take notice and head to Long Island and maybe get that team even further in the playoffs before they head to Brooklyn.
I actually had somebody ask me, does John Tavares deserve superstar status? And I said, you know what? He's on the wrong team. If you want him to have superstar status, pair him up with Crosby, Malkin, Iginla, and James Neal and Chris Kunitz over there in Pittsburgh, or pair him up with Datsuk and Zetterberg and Eriksson, and he's on the wrong squad. But you know what? They can build. They can build this team. They really can. And Nabokov is a good start in net, and I do like his comeback story and everything. And I also find it comical that Tim Thomas is on the roster right now, but that's probably not going to last much longer after they sign his offer sheet. I don't know why. But the Islanders, they got some great young talent. I like what I see out of them. Molson, Okposo, obviously Tavares, and then an odd mix there with Streit, and also you name a player. His name just slipped out of my head. Oh, Brad Boys. This team is just, they were a mystery to me. And when they were making a fight for the playoffs, I really questioned it, like, does this team even deserve to be here? And, that's why I discounted them right away and said 4-0 sweep, Pittsburgh handily. But no, the Islanders put up one hell of a fight, and all the credit in the world to them. And I think that they're almost there, but very easily they could drop all the way down to the bottom next year unless they build from this in any capacity.
It seems like they have that Columbus mystique to them.
Yeah.
And they come back and redo what they did last year. Yeah. Obviously, the goaltending in both teams is a mystery. Does Nabokov repeat? Does Bobrovsky repeat?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think a lot more, and they still remain a mystery in my eyes. I think a lot more was learned about the Pittsburgh Penguins in the series than the New York Islanders, and that's saying something for a team with the players that they have on it. To watch them struggle against a group of scrappers, to say the least. I have a hard time putting Pittsburgh into the finals, and we talked about it a few weeks ago. Anything short of a Stanley Cup for that team is a failure.
Well, we'll talk about the team that you thought had a lot of depth and was going to go all the way and how they struggled. But Vokoun and Fleury is another goaltending controversy that we'll bring up in just a few moments. But, that was quite interesting to see Fleury. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people from Pittsburgh, and they just never really had the confidence in Fleury as a goaltender. But then I always, reflect back on that key save at the end of the 2009 Stanley Cup Finals when he went diving across the crease to stop Nick Lidstrom at the last second from tying Game 7, and they won the Cup because of that save. So you got to give that guy some credit, but, some nights he's just not on his game. But Tomas Vokoun, a well-seasoned veteran, it's good to see him contributing in a way, and, just think about where he was last year with Washington, just wanting to be on a roster, and now he is the relied-upon goaltender for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Yep, and it's going to be interesting. Let's say this team goes to the Stanley Cup and wins on Vokoun's back. I think that's the bigger headline.
Yeah.
Heading into next season. Not that the Pittsburgh Penguins won the Cup. That was to be expected given what they did at the deadline.
Yeah.
I think you have to wonder. You've put your quote unquote superstar goaltender on the bench and let the backup win you the Stanley Cup. Now what do you do in the off season? Now you have a head case on your hands.
Yep. Now you get rid of Fleury for sure. That's answer one. The Pittsburgh Penguins will take on the winner of this next series we're going to talk about, and this series. I called it, but I had way too many games. But first off, yes, both of us picked Pittsburgh, so kudos to us. The next series, you picked the right number of games, but the wrong team. I picked the right team, but the wrong number of games. Ottawa surprising everybody and taking out the Montreal Canadiens. And we had that memorable Cinco de Mayo 236 penalty minute fiesta. Man, did that make for some great TV on Cinco de Mayo. But wow, so the Ottawa Senators, you weren't convinced about them last year. Are you convinced about them this year?
No, no, I'm still not on board with this team, and you can't tell me that they're better than Montreal. I'm thinking that was a fluke. Carey Price is still a better goaltender than Anderson in
Really?
my eyes. Yes, absolutely. I will take Carey Price over Anderson any day of the week. When Ottawa gets Spezza back, that's going to be an interesting add to the mix. They got Carlson back. Obviously, that paid dividends. Alfredson is still skating somehow. I can't figure that one out myself. But good for him for sticking with it. I just can't get into the Ottawa Senators. And Montreal had all the right pieces, and they just flopped. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They completely flopped, and I think I'll give credit to Ottawa for playing a good series and keeping up with Montreal, but I don't know. I don't know. There's something that just rubs me the wrong way about this Sens.
Well, looking at the Senators roster versus the Montreal Canadiens roster, you got names that you're like, who? What? Zabanajadi? Zabanajadi? Okay, all right. Guillaume Latendresse? Oh, wait, we already know that one. But I like what I see out of Silverberg. I like what I see out of Zibanejad. I do like, Conacher being in the mix here. This team, it has a weird sense of a depth that kind of eludes a lot of teams, and I think I don't know. It was enjoyable to see this rivalry just play itself out. I mean, Paul McLean and Michel Therrien trading off remarks in the post games. It's fantastic.
It's what Canada needs.
Yes.
To be honest with you, they need to renew some rivalries here. They need to get themselves back in the mode of playoff hockey, because you're going to see a lot more Canadian teams here in the future.
Right.
Trying to get the cup back to Canada. But I mean, what I hated about playoff hockey, let's say before the lockout, you didn't see any fights. Playoff hockey was a clean gentleman's game.
Uh-huh.
Something happened after that lockout to where we saw fights, we saw pushing and shoving, and most recently this line brawl. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. And you know what? Nothing. There was no aspect of the game. There was no tradition that was tainted because of it. They still shook hands at the end. They're still good rivals, but playoff hockey deserves a little bit more action like this. It's a little too clean for me sometimes.
Yeah. All I'm going to say is with Ottawa, I do like their depth on defense, and obviously with goaltending with Craig Anderson. I like what I see out of Mathot. I like what I see out of Greiba. Greiba's a scrapper. Gonchar gives like the seasoned experience. Cohen, and then obviously Chris Phillips, and then Mike Lundin when he shows up. I mean, these guys, it's the group of kind of like nobodies and somebodies mixing together, and suddenly there's some sort of chemistry and it works for them. But whether or not they can hold it together against Pittsburgh, remember it was 2007 that the Sens outdid the Penguins in 5 games, shocking everybody. They're capable of doing it again, I think.
Let's take a trip down memory lane. Was that the year that the Sabres ousted the Senators?
No, that was the year that the Senators ousted the Sabres.
Was 2006 the year that the Sabres ousted the Senators?
Yes.
In the greatest hockey game that I've ever seen in my life?
Yes, Jason Pominville. Yes, that was it. That was back in 2006.
The roster, if you can recall, Spezza, Heatley, Chara, Alfredson, Smolinski. I believe Redden was still on that team. There's another forward I'm missing. Havlat was on that team.
Yep.
that was a ridiculous roster. And
You don't think it's ridiculous now?
no. I have concerns for that team going forward. You lose Gonchar in a couple of years, if not next year. I don't know. I mean, that guy's getting up there in age. There's not much longer that he can do this. Same thing with Alfredson. So
Well,
maybe it's
yeah.
you know
Go.
I can't put trust in these rookies. They're playing well right now, but I need a couple more seasons out of them to say, okay, here comes Ottawa. They're going to be the powerhouse of the East, or whatever you want to call it in the next couple of years.
When I look back on that 2005-2006 roster for the Ottawa Senators,
That's ridiculous.
don't forget they had Dominic Hasek at the time. They also had, you forgot about Mike Fisher, Patrick Eaves. They had Vaclav Vrata. How about that, huh? Anton Volchenkov. Obviously, you said Marty Havlat. And the one that stands out to me is Andre Mazzaros, who I called the human shield. He blocked shots like none other. I mean, he's just an amazing player. And then Peter Schaefer, you mentioned. That team was built, and the Sabres shocked him, and then the Sabres got shocked by Carolina, who ended up winning the Cup. But, I mean, Ottawa, this year, I think they have the potential. They have a lot of young players, late 80s players that are in the mix, and some early 90s. Most of their roster appears with the number 80, 90 at the end. So, with the exception of Sergei Gonchar and Chris Phillips, everybody is pretty much and Chris Neal obviously is 70s.
Alfredson.
And Alfredson too. Yeah. So pretty young roster, if you will, and I think that they have what it takes to take on Pittsburgh, but you're not convinced that they can put Pittsburgh aside.
No, I'm give me a couple more years of the exact same thing, and then I'll be on board. But
Okay.
It's no, I pass. Next series, go on.
All right. Sorry about that awkwardness. Apparently my dog wanted to get out of the room.
Let him go.
Yeah, I'm letting him go. I think he couldn't stand my Ottawa supporting, and yeah.
I can't. I know that much.
Okay, now we had 2 7-game series to cap off here. Let's pick one. I don't want to jump into the Capitals one just yet. Let's leave that one for last.
Sure.
Boston and Toronto. Schrembs. You and I both picked Toronto in 7 games, and guess what? We were right up until the last few minutes of this game.
If I could offer something to a Toronto fan,
Condolences.
yeah, I guess it's a good place to start. I've never seen a full collapse, and you know what? Hats off to Tuukka Rask in overtime there to make 2 incredible saves before the team ends up winning it. I have no words. I was literally we were texting back and forth.
Yeah.
And 1 minute it's Toronto, can you believe this Toronto team? And then 5 minutes later, I sent you the message. The game is tied, and we exchanged expletives, and 5 minutes later the game's over. So it's you know what? Being born and raised in Buffalo, I was raised to hate the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I felt for them. There was a small part of me that was hoping to see them move on, and I don't know. Where do you go from there with that team?
1 minute and 22 seconds away from advancing. Well, actually, I'm sorry. Let me correct myself here. They were 51 seconds away from advancing on to the second round. And this is the first time Toronto's in the playoffs in 9 years, and they let it slip away. Credit to Randy Carlyle for putting this team into the playoffs. And, they could have finished a little bit better, but, not much better. It just, obviously being in that position of 4 and 5 between these two teams, the Northeast had a strong presence this year. It really did, except with the exception of Buffalo. Toronto, they really have their work cut out for them. Boston, they have their roster set. Okay, Ottawa obviously has to make some tweaks. Montreal, they have the biggest comeback story from last season, being in the basement of the East. But Toronto has always been kind of on the cusp. They've always been on the cusp of making it. And Leaf Nation is so strong, but to have the rug ripped out from underneath you and go face first at the TD Bank North Garden is just phenomenal. I like Toronto's roster. I like Nazem Kadri. I like what he does out there. He is a fast and smooth hands forward, and then you throw in the variety of Phil Kessel, James Van Riemsdyk. This is kind of his calling in his career suddenly
Yep.
for him. I mean, look at the turnaround for him. Uh, well played on that trade. And then Clark MacArthur, kind of a mystery, but he's added a lot of depth to this team since he's gotten there from Buffalo. Dion Phaneuf, you have a strong, gritty captain. I hope Buffalo names. I hope they name Steve Ott their captain so they can match the intensity of Dion Phaneuf
Yep.
in a captain's role. Because you know what, I think you need a hard-nosed captain like Dion Phaneuf on your team. I think this team is very well put together, but I still question every year their goaltending. Is Reimer their goaltender? They thought Gustafsson was a few
Yeah.
years back, thinking that the monster was the answer. They brought him in overseas to just give him a look, and they thought this guy was incredible. What happened to him? I mean, and then
He's
you
in
thought
Detroit.
Scrivens, yeah, and you're backing up a career goaltender that's not going to take a day off, maybe 3 days off every 12 game cycle at
Yep.
least. Um, I think that they need to figure out goaltending. Schrembs, watch Buffalo send Miller across the border to Toronto. Because you know what? If Miller ends up on Toronto, you have an unstoppable force.
It's it's something that has crossed my mind, and I hate to bring it up because people are absolutely against the idea of trading within conference, and even more so within a division. But you have to think that Reimer is not the answer for that team, and he let a real soft goal in to tie that game.
Yeah.
And I get that it's Boston, but you had Boston beat.
Yep.
I mean, that would have been one of the biggest upsets, despite the seeds, despite how closely they were ranked going in. I still put Toronto as a huge underdog there.
Yep.
But you have to figure there's going to be a goaltending change there, and I want to say you're going to see maybe Halak go there. Maybe Luongo changes his mind. Those reports came out saying Luongo turned down the offer to go to Toronto. Could you imagine if they put Luongo in Toronto this season?
It's a possibility. And by the way, not to discredit Cody Franson and Joffrey Lupul, those are two guys that are big forces on this Toronto team. But yeah, I definitely agree that maybe Luongo, yeah, he might be seeing another offer here in the near future because, like I'm saying, Toronto really needs to round out their goaltending situation to make this an unstoppable force of a team. I mean, and Grabowski, come on, this roster is incredible when you take a look at it. I mean, their defense is stacked. Their offense has great depth. I mean, look at their defense. It's Phaneuf, Franson, O'Byrne, John Michael Lyles, uh, Connor Gunnarsson, and I mean, it's phenomenal.
Don't forget
And Gardner too.
Jake Gardner,
Yeah.
who's coming up and is going to be a huge presence for that team. You have to figure casual hockey fans look at that roster and easily dismiss it. But if you are a true hockey fan, you look at that roster, you think, crap, that team has got all the right pieces to it. It's just that back end is a huge question mark. But what is it going to take to get Luongo into a Leafs uniform? Are you going to disrupt this flow that you have on your team right now? Is it worth it?
Uh, I don't know. I really couldn't tell you. And by the way, I'm going to apologize to Carl Gunnarsson. I accidentally named him a basketball player. I think Toronto they're not going to need too much more to they're not going to need many parts to fix what had happened in this season. Granted, you also got to play into the factor that this was a shortened season, and at what point do you think that they would have collapsed? I mean, you cut the season in half, almost down the middle this year. Okay, granted it's a few extra games. I want to say 6 over half. So could Toronto have carried this roster through a full 82 game season and still produce the same results, though?
Good question, and we always anticipate certain teams to, make that late season push or tank out towards the end of the season, and you have to figure that Toronto, even though it was a shortened season, they proved that maybe they could have lasted the test of time. Usually we see them as bottom dwellers, and we're not talking about that late season push or that late season crash like we see from other teams. You got to wonder, and is Luongo the right answer for that team? Do they revisit that in the off season here?
He might be, because last year, remember, Buffalo and Toronto were fighting to get into the playoffs at the end. They were trying to make the late season push, and their roster was not too different from what we've seen this year. So I honestly think that Toronto could use Roberto Luongo and maybe hold on to Reimer as a backup. But the question then becomes, is Reimer mentally a starting goaltender, and how will he take it? Will he mentally be broken down by the fact that they brought in a starting goaltender? I mean, then if that's the case, hold on to Scrivens. I mean, you got some options there. Scrivens, he's an okay goaltender. He shows up when he needs to be called upon, but yeah, you got to take a look and see what the mentality is once Toronto actually gets their number one goaltender, and I think they're going to be hunting in the off season. So, listen, we're about 45 minutes into this already. We're spending a lot more time on these matchups than I thought.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Let's finish with Boston now. Let's give them some credit that they deserve.
Yeah.
The cardiac kids, if you will, of the Eastern Conference. I'm surprised at how that series went. They were played a lot tougher than I think they anticipated being played. But you have the offense to get you through. I have a feeling that Rangers series is going to go their way. If you want to talk about a team with a complete package, I think the Boston Bruins are the team from the East that have everything in the right place. They got a little bit of a scare in that first round, but they have the goaltending, they have the defense, they have the offense. I can't say the same about the Rangers. Better goaltending, yes, but you can't rely on that offense. It's you see them struggle through 4 or 5 games. Yeah, that nice 5-goal output in that final game, very convincing on the surface, but deep down, where's Rick Nash? So, and we'll talk about him in a second, but you have the Boston Bruins as the complete package. I'd like to see Boston, LA, 2 complete teams going at it. That'd be a lot of fun, but only time will tell.
Yeah, 1-goal games pretty much throughout the last 4 games of this series against Toronto, and you saw in games 5 and 6 that they can button up on defense and hold their opponent to only 2 goals against. In that, the fact that well, actually they took game 5, or I beg your pardon. They took game 6, obviously, or no, they did not. I'm sorry. I'm confusing this series and how it's played out. Yeah, I got it backwards though. But Toronto, they flipped those numbers, and you got yourself a good defense set up there in Boston. But you rely upon Marchand, and you rely upon let's say Yager, for instance here. I'm still not convinced. I mean, you look down the names. Yeah, a lot of these guys played for the Cup team years back, but just a couple years back. But I just don't feel it with Rask. I don't. There's something about Tuukka. It's just he shows up when he wants to. Khudobin we saw a lot of him at the end of the season because Rask wasn't in full form. Do you think Rask actually has his mojo going to take this team all the way through?
Um, he's not a playoff tested goaltender. The playoffs, from what I understand from listening to players, is a completely different beast altogether. And we know he's got a little bit of a temper to him. We know he can flake a little bit. We've seen that in the minors. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe Tuukka Rask was the one who decided to spill the Gatorade container, the entire container, out onto the ice.
Oh yeah, he had quite a launch too. I think it went about 50 yards.
It was a meltdown, and that put a lot of his character in question. And obviously, he stood up to his critics this year. The job that he's done could nominate him for a Vezina Trophy.
Yeah.
But there is going to be an opponent on the other side who has a little bit more experience in the league, has some playoff experience, but is far and away a better goaltender, and that's Henrik Lundqvist.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a time-tested goaltender versus a up-and-coming goaltender.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a good matchup. I'd like to say that Boston offers just a little bit more in terms of consistency and scoring, but that goaltending. I mean, look at Lundqvist walking into the second round, coming off of 2 straight shutouts.
Yeah, let's get to that series. And by the way, Tuukka Rask, him launching the Gatorade, the crate full of Gatorades. I think it probably went 50 feet, not 50 yards. I just like to exaggerate. Yeah.
Nobody looks at distance in that. Nobody looks at that accomplishment.
No, exactly. Yeah, we're not talking football, but hey, let's talk about the Rangers taking out the number 2 Washington Capitals. I called the Rangers in 6. You called the Rangers in 7. So we're both right on the team, but just you got the number right and I did not. So we didn't do so bad this year. So
no,
yeah.
not so far.
No, but this series, man, did this one get out of hand. And then Ovechkin recently calling out the NHL in a Russian newspaper saying that the league had rigged this series and he wasn't sure if the NHL directly contacted the officiating for Game 7, but he said that Game 7 was because of the officiating. I call bullcrap.
I'm not going to argue that the officiating had its moments. There were some points in this series where I sort of cocked my head when you are offering the Rangers 7 or 8 power plays in a game.
Game 6, maybe.
Yeah, you're kind of tipping your head a little bit. And I was talking to a coworker of mine, and he's like, what are you expecting out of Game 7 tonight? And I said, you know what? You're not going to see one penalty. I guarantee you, they let them play. This is exactly what they're looking for. You want a clean game. The ref will put his whistle away and call it if absolutely necessary. But and right on cue, how many penalties did we have in that Game 7?
Mm-hmm.
Less than 5, I think.
Yeah, just about.
And that proved in a game of skill, the Rangers were better that night. I wouldn't necessarily say they were the more complete team this year. They've had their ups and downs, and that trade definitely sparked something within that organization to pick up their play a little bit. But I'm a believer in Braden Holtby as a goaltender who's not getting the help and support that he deserves, both on the ice and from, I guess, the hockey world.
I think the trade that made the bigger impact. By the way, the both teams went 0 for 2 on their power play chances, and this game was very evenly matched on the stats except for the shots. Washington did outshoot the Rangers 35-27, so let's give all the credit in the world to Henrik Lundqvist for getting that 5-0 shutout and just standing tall in net. But, the trade that I think that really impacted this team more so was not the Nash trade. I actually think it was the trade to get rid of Marian Gaborik and bring in Moore, Brassard, and Dorsett. I love those three, and well, let's just say that we got some agitators out of that trade, and you know
Yep.
what? It was needed to shake up this lineup and get things sparked out there on the ice. And if my mind serves me correctly, I think it's going to be emblazoned into our brains the bloody jaw of Derek Dorsett in that game. Game 6, of course, I'm referring to as Mike Green looked him right in the eyes as he was down on his knees and popped him in the mouth with a cross-check. Schrembs, why was there not a suspension as a result of that?
It's always one of those things you wonder about the consistency of this discipline, this new disciplined NHL. You have all the technology, even if it's not caught. You've seen it in the past.
Yeah.
Something that doesn't merit a penalty during a game because it wasn't caught. You can go back to film.
Yep.
And issue um, the suspension as you see fit. But you know what, I cannot say that, and you know what, that's where I might differ from you a little bit. There were some things in that series that were clearly missed,
Right.
coming from both sides, and you know, I think the referees did have a hand in not giving the series to the Rangers, but certainly making it more more easier to get that game 7.
I'm not saying Dorsett's a saint, but you know.
Oh no, and that's where I would play devil's advocate. Dorsett he's a goon. He's a scrapper.
Yep.
But regardless, what happened to him is you know, it's coming from a $5 or $6 million defenseman.
Yep.
So what does this whole status of the NHL play into suspensions? I think it was perfectly clear. Now, I didn't follow up on it. Was there a hearing and no suspension, or
No mention. No
mention at all?
No
That's
mention of it.
incredible.
And also in that same string of events, Ribeiro tripped up Dorsett as he was on his way to the bench. And then after the play had stopped due to the ensuing scrum down low, up in front of the benches, Eric Fair, got his butt end of his stick, up and underneath the jaw. He popped Dorsett, and that went unseen and uncalled.
Dorsett must have done something.
He did
at some point in
instigate
his
it,
life.
yeah. Right.
At some point in his life, he pissed off the Washington Capitals.
Yeah.
But you have to look past that, and you have to wonder what's going on in Washington. It's developing a really good rivalry, to say the least.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
it's tied at 2 now in the playoff series between these two clubs in the last 5 years. So,
what can this team do? They have the offense. Their offense will get better next year when they bring in Kuznetsov.
right now you got to fire McPhee for bringing in Erat and getting rid of Fedorov.
I don't know. Wait, Forsberg?
Or Forsberg, I beg your pardon. I'm sorry.
Um,
It's getting late.
you have to think this team is missing something. It's not goaltending. I like Holtby a lot. I like what he offers. I think he is a good playoff goaltender, and he kept this team in the mix this year and got them back into that top spot in the Southeast. But I am not on board with Mike Green. I think his time has passed, but he's coming off of a good season. Now would be the time to trade him.
Game over. Green will go to another team, is what you're thinking.
That's my call. If they were smart and knowing his injury history and knowing that he's coming off a relatively healthy and productive season, this would be the time to sell him. This would be the time to bring up Orlov permanently, get him in the mix, and get one more guy. I don't know, maybe you don't need the offense. The offense is there. I mean, they brought in Ribeiro. That was an incredible move on their part.
And you laughed at me when I drafted him in fantasy.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about that.
What are your thoughts about Alexei?
Alexei,
The hockey player for the Washington Capitals, Sergei Alexei? Or Steve Alexei, I'm sorry.
Alexei. I got you.
I almost want to make him Russian just because of that last name, but clearly he's from Michigan.
He came out of nowhere for this team to step up, and it's going to be hard to say no next season. No, don't come back. I mean, even you have a power play quarterback in John Carlson. He is your future, but you've had everybody contributing. I don't care for John Erskine, but he chipped in here and there, and he's a good defender. He's a gritty guy.
Okay.
You have the good balance. There's something up front that doesn't make any sense. You have the names up front. Brower came alive this year. Ribeiro came alive. Perot came alive.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was producing offensively. Is the cancer on this team? Is it Ovechkin?
It's been thought about. I mean, if you keep that lineup the same, and then you look at the defense, Alsner, Hillen, and Green, Alexi, and Carlson, I wouldn't get rid of. I would think about getting rid of Green, but the team doesn't. Ovechkin, he lit it up in the regular season. He found a spark right after the team had an abysmal beginning. Right out the gates. I don't think you need to get rid of Ovechkin. You got to get rid of some of the aging crops and maybe add more young talent, or maybe get your rental player that can really spark things up, for give him a 1-year contract or what have you. But I don't like the fact that they brought in Marty Erat to shore things up. I mean, that was just obscene. I can't believe that George McPhee made such a big deal about that.
Erat has been a lifer in Nashville.
Yeah.
And he's been a good player. The problem is he has been a top line player for that team.
Yeah.
Now he gets shuffled into the mix, second, third line, doesn't do a thing.
Yeah.
So clearly he's got top line agenda written all over him. He'd be better suited in Nashville. It is just too crowded in Washington, and now you've given up Philippe Forsberg, a nice young prospect, for a rental player who I wouldn't even consider bringing back next year.
Yeah. Well, do you think Marty Erat's injury that came of Game 4, do you think that impacted anything at all, or are we just going to rule out Marty Erat as a Washington Capital?
Yeah, I'm not thinking he's coming back. Now, they did bring in Wojtek Wolski,
right,
with hopes of stealing a 25-point player this season at a very good price, but he did not pan out. He got a couple early on, but sort of fell back into the depth charts. Now you can put Erat on a third line and let him do his thing, but he's used to being with Stitson and Lake Wand, two guys that are playing top line with power play time, and he's not going to get it in Washington. There are just far too many people bidding for that spot.
All right, Schrembs. Listen, we couldn't get to our goaltending controversy
I'll do it next week.
We'll do it next week, but let's go ahead and let's make our picks right now. Just get those out in the open. All right, let's start with the West. Let's talk Chicago and Detroit. What do you think the outcome of this series will be?
Not knowing how Detroit's defense is going to come out, still being skeptical about that. I don't know. I'd say Chicago in 6.
Chicago in 6. I am going to. This one really tears me up. I did not see that coming against Anaheim.
Well, you have secret wing routes too that you refuse to acknowledge.
Yeah, I do. Red Wings in 6.
That's too cute. That is too cute.
Thank you. You know what? This is the last year I can actually be a Red Wings fan, since they're going to be
back to the East, man.
Yeah, that's incredible. All right. All right. We'll get into our reasons next week and why we're picking what we're picking right now, since we're running out of time very rapidly. Let's move on to the next one. L.A. versus San Jose. Schrembs.
You go first.
Oh, you want me to go first?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go L.A. in 5.
Mark me down for the same.
Are you serious?
I was dead serious. I was going to say 4 at first, but let's give San Jose one game at least.
Okay. All right. All right. I think that one's going to be a huge surprise. Pittsburgh and Ottawa. If you want me to go first, I will.
No, I'll trade off with you. Pittsburgh in 6.
Okay. I'm going to go Pittsburgh in 6. Yes.
Okay.
Just yeah. If we remember from previous podcasts, I was on that boat. So Boston and New York, I think I know where you're going, but I'm going to go first on this one to cap off the picks for the second round. And I'm actually going to go with the New York Rangers in 7 games.
I will counter your bold and obnoxious prediction with the Bruins in 7 games.
Oh, the Bruins. This party is ruined. So we do have some differences in 2 of these series, and it should be fun to see how it pans out. We're going to get a special guest. I swear we're going to get a special guest. So I have to thank you for joining me. It's that bad. We're going to get some special guests in here real soon, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Granted, I am the eye candy of this audio broadcast.
Oh, you certainly are.
We'll get some fresh talent in here, and I'm still waiting on Randy Burridge. I really hope that guy gets back to me sometime soon and get the ball rolling on getting some NHL talk going on in here.
Definitely. Come on, Buddy Holly, get to work.
Yeah, I got this.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening, and enjoy the second round of the 2012-2013 NHL playoffs. David Stearns for Brian Schrembs here at the Cross Ice Feed saying, enjoy the hockey. Don't stop believing.